All right, Nate, can you hear me? Can you give me a quick mic check?
Matt, you're coming through.
All right, perfect. Well, I want to thank everybody for hopping on our AcreEdge and Landis webinar this evening. And I apologize. I'm taking this from the road, so if it's a little bit dark, you kind of forget that it gets dark at 5 o'clock at night. So I apologize for that, but it is important, and I did want to kick this off and start this the right way. So again, thank you for your time today. I hope the things that we're going to cover today are going to bring value to your operation and more importantly, to your operation in 2025. Today, we're going to talk about really from a high level. I'm going to kick off what AcreEdge is and what we're trying to do at Landis. Scott Ahrenholtz is going to review some of the yield results that we saw in 2024 and highlight a couple of the main products that are in our AcreEdge lineup. Dan Bjorklund, and then after that, is going to cover corn genetics and how fertility affects those genetics differently, and some things he saw this last year that we think that you all can implement or think about as we go into 2025. And then we're going to end for our last presentation with Eric Snodgrass giving you all a weather update, which should be some pretty good information. To cap everything off, Tyler Schultes is gonna wrap things up for us and kind of reiterate what we heard on this call today and kind of the next call to action and what you can expect from Landis. So again, my name is Matt Brown. I lead the AcreEdge portfolio for Landis. I'm really happy to be here tonight. What is AcreEdge? AcreEdge is really our value add portfolio for the next generation of yield enhancement. And really what we're trying to do as an organization is not bring 100 different products to your operation. We have a very steadfast thing that we believe in. And when we bring a new product to the AcreEdge portfolio, not everything in the AcreEdge portfolio is a value add product. Some of those things are adjuvants. While we bring high-end, high-quality products and adjuvants as well, the things you're going to hear about today are yield enhancement products. And so I want to be really clear that as we bring those to you, we have a steadfast rule that my team operates by. And we believe that if we're going to bring a product to you all, it needs to have a 3-to-1 ROI. And if it doesn't, then it's not good enough for us. Now, it's very hard to replicate that year in and year out. But as we evaluate new products and bring new things to the market, our goal is to make sure that we are delivering a 3-to-1 ROI on your farm. And so I think it's important to bring that up for you to understand that what we are trying to do is different. And it is different than some of the other value add companies that are in the market today. And the reason we're different is because we're building products that are specific to your acres and what we know works in our Landis footprint on corn and soybean production. And that's really what we're focused on day in and day out. And I wanted to highlight that before we kick that off. And so you know that when you hear about AcreEdge, you know what to expect, that we're not making this stuff in a bathtub. We have a $15 million facility in Boone, Iowa that allows us to do those things and bring those high quality products to you all on your farm. So with that being said, thank you very much for your time today. You're in great hands. I'm going to turn it over to Scott Ahrenholtz and let him talk about what we saw in 2024 and highlight a few products.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Matt Brown. And I am Scott Ahrenholtz. I am the regional sales manager for AcreEdge. And I want to spend the next 15-20 minutes really talking to you about some products. Next slide, Nate, please. So like Matt Brown said, I want to talk about just not about results of the AcreEdge products, but I really want to kick it off and really talk about the why, because we're going to finish this webinar, and it's an honor to be able to present with Mr. Snodgrass, but he's going to talk about environmental conditions and what some of the stresses could be with that. And I really want to tie together how AcreEdge and some of the active ingredients can help us work through that. So I want to start off with this slide here. What is the genetic potential of the crops we raise today? If anybody here has seen me present before, the first question I ask is, if I set a bag of corn and soybeans on the table in front of me, what is the genetic potential of that? And I would give you two hints. as far as corn, the 2024 USDA proven yield was 183.1 bushel. The world record, which was made by David Hula in 2023, was 623 plus bushel, right? If you start doing the math, our USDA average is about 29% of what the world record is. On soybeans, 51.7 bushel, where the world record was actually broke by Alex Harrell in 2024 this year, and it was 218 bushel. If you do the math on that, that's 24%. Now, I asked the question, what is the yield potential in a bag of corn and bag of soybeans today? Really, we've got to believe it's greater than 623 bushel in corn and 218 bushel in beans, because there's areas that are raising that. The genetic potential, that the ability for that seed to raise that is greater than that. Next slide, please, Nate. The reason I share that is this is actually work that was done in the early 2000s. And this just doesn't pertain to corn and soybeans. It pertains to potatoes, sugar beets, wheat, corn, barley. And really what the study shows is this. The yield potential in crops today, we recognize about 24% of that. The first slide I showed you, the USDA average is 24% on soybeans versus the world record. When we look at corn, it's about 29%. So where is that yield going? 11% of that yield is lost to abiotic stress, or to biotic stress, excuse me. Biotic stress is stress done to our crops from living things. It's going to be insects, it's going to be diseases, it's going to be insects. All these things are living that actually can rob yield from us. The reason that this is a smaller piece of the pie is as an industry, and the growers are on this webinar tonight, really focus and do a great job on controlling weeds. They're putting fungicides out for diseases. We're applying insecticides, whether it's planting, whether we're doing insecticide with fungicide in the early reproductive stages. The greater percent of the loss is lost to abiotic stress, 65%. Abiotic stress is lost yield due to non-living things. This is fertility stress. This is environmental stress, things that we fully can't control. The rest of our talk this evening that I want to talk about with AcreEdge, that 65% of that yield loss, we cannot control Mother Nature in the area that we raise crops here in Iowa today, but we can somewhat control how crops actually respond to it. Next slide, please. So one of the pillar products within our AcreEdge lineup is a product called Crop Power. Next slide. That Crop Power is a product that we actually coined as this. When you look at Crop Power in a nutshell, when you think about a Ford half-ton pickup, or if you're a General Motors fan, Ford is powered by EcoBoost. If you're General Motors and you like the diesel motor they put in that, you've got that Duramax diesel. What Crop Power is to us is that Duramax diesel or the EcoBoost. It's that active ingredient that helps power some of the nutritional products we actually have to actually feed the plants. Next slide, please. So what is Crop Power? This is actually a unique proprietary product for Landis, and it is technology that is a biostimulant. That biostimulant comes from a plant-based extracts, which are Ecolonia maxima. Ecolonia maxima is actually seaweed extracts, okay? The other compound that is in there is an amino acid complex or protein hydrolysates. So in layman's terms, it's this. The actual plant-based extracts is going to be vitamins. So if you and I were to take vitamins every day, that would help build our immune system. So if we were exposed to the common cold or the flu, we might gain symptoms of that, but it wouldn't be as bad as if we didn't have our immune system built up. The amino acid complex is going to be that energy drink, which actually gives us energy that helps us function a lot more efficient than what we do when we don't have that energy drink. So in a nutshell, it's this. The actual plant-based extracts, it helps the plant reduce stresses, especially when you talk about environmental stresses. And Mr. Snodgrass is going to get to that. And this is a compound that really can help us mitigate and help reduce the effects of those stresses. when we look at the amino acid complex, they're going to be that energy source that helps that plant function at a more efficient rate. And to do what it does, it just does it more efficiently. Next slide, please. So does it work? Like Matt said, we're actually gonna share some yield results. So this is a crop power. This is a compound. In my next slide, I'm gonna share with you some what all crop power is in from an AcreEdge lineup. But this is actually some research done by a research organization in Northeast Iowa. These are small plots, and these applications were. The trials were done on an 8 replication basis. So we've had 8 replications of corn, 8 replications of soybeans, and it was taken to yield. Now, the crop power was put on at 1 quart to the acre. And this is going to be a higher rate than what we're going to apply with some of our other combinations. But we're seeing some very, very phenomenal responses from that. So when you look at corn applied at the herbicide timing, that's a little over 16 bushels the acre. And we're just short of 4 bushel the acre on soybeans when the soybeans was applied at that R1, R2 timeframe. So there is an excellent response. And really what this research is showing us, we've got some research also this year with similar rates. What this actually is showing us is we really need to strive to get a minimum of 1 quart per acre of crop power on a corn or soybean crop to really help mitigate those environmental stresses that we're going to be exposed to. Next slide, please. So when you look at crop power, this is kind of a busy slide, but everything I've got boxed in red is going to be what we have in the AcreEdge lineup that is going to have crop power in it. So it starts in our seed treatments for our soybeans. We custom build starter grades. And these are included in our starter grades. They're going to be in crop power is going to be included with that. It's going to be in our foliar nutrition. We've got a full, robust lineup of foliar nutrition that's going to have crop power in it. But we also have crop power in our Grow AMS, which is an adjuvant. So when we go to spray post-emerge, corn, soybeans, things like that, we're going to be able to get crop power in it. So to actually get that quart per acre active ingredient on a crop in a year, there are several opportunities to do that. This evening, we're actually going to focus on the foliar recommendation. So things that can be applied with our herbicide and fungicide. And I'm actually going to feature 3 products, talk about those. I want to go over a recommendation with you, and then we'll share some yield results with that. Next slide, please. So those foliar nutrition products are going to be Crop Lift with Crop Power, NitroEdge Boron with Crop Power, and Rhizin and K with Crop Power. If this gets overwhelming and you only want to remember one product, remember Crop Lift with Crop Power, okay? When we talk about mitigating stress, Crop Lift is going to be that compound that's going to have the most crop power with it. So we'll go ahead and talk about Crop Lift here. So next slide, please. So Crop Lift is a 50% nutritional product, 50% crop power. That nutritional program is going to be potassium, sulfur, it's going to have zinc, manganese, and iron. It also has crop power with it. It's a 50-50 inclusion rate. The reason for those nutrients is really to help energize that plant and really turn on the defense mechanisms to help overcome the effects of those environmental stresses, okay? It also helps stimulate the activity within that plant. So it's going to help that plant assimilate and utilize nitrogen more efficiently and also potassium. So this is going to help build that plant and be that energy source. But the other side of it is 50% of it is going to be crop power. What did I say crop power was? Crop power is going to be that vitamin that's going to help build the immune system, but also that energy drink. So if we get into some drought conditions, we get in some heat, we get in some cool stress, crop power is going to mitigate and help reduce the effects of those stresses. So when you look at Crop Lift, the recommended use rate is 1 to 2 quart per acre. What I'd recommend is apply this at your herbicide timing when you've got enough vegetative growth in a corn and soybean crop. So when you apply that, we can get enough Crop Lift so it works inside the plant. We've got nutritional and crop power that we want to get inside that plant to help drive the effects and reduce the environmental stress pieces of this, okay? Next slide, please. The next product is going to be AcreEdge boron. So I'm building a corn recommendation right now. AcreEdge boron is a nitrogen boron combination with crop power. When you look at the inclusion rate, this is going to be more of a nutritional play with crop power to help build that stress mitigation part of it, but it does not have as much crop power as what crop lift has in it. AcreEdge boron is a 24% nitrogen with a 1% boron. The nitrogen is slow release. Really, the play with this is going to be that fungicide timing. I would want this put in with my fungicide, insecticide, applied at around that tassel or post-tassel application. Really, what we're trying to do is that nitrogen and boron. That nitrogen is going to really help feed that plant during that peak uptake. We're still dependent on that plant to gain the nitrogen from the soil. We're just giving it that energy to get through that peak uptake, or we could be in a stress environment, or it could be part of a spoon feed strategy, but it's nitrogen to help that plant have that energy to really start the photosynthetic effects with that part of the plant. Again, it has a 5% inclusion rate of crop power that's going to help that plant overcome those environmental stresses. So next slide. So when you actually look at these two, so this would be the life cycle of a corn plant from the time a plant actually starts to emerge through physiological maturity. Crop lift, a quart per acre, I would apply at that herbicide timing. And then when we go to apply our fungicide and insecticide at that pre-tassel to just shortly after tassel, I would apply AcreEdge boron at a gallon to the acre to help feed that plant and then also re-energize the crop power part of it. Okay, next slide. So let's move over to soybeans. Okay, remember crop lift. Crop lift, I'm going to start with crop lift, and then I want to talk about Rhizin and K. Rhizin and K is 5% nitrogen, 20% potassium, and 13% sulfur. Again, just like AcreEdge boron, this is going to be that fungicide play in soybeans. So when we're going out there at R3 and putting on our fungicide, insecticide on our soybeans, this is going to be that nutritional play that's going to help feed and really get some nitrogen to that plant. It's slow release nitrogen. We're at that R3, we're at peak uptake of nitrogen. More importantly, we're taking in more potassium than we are any other nutrient in a bean plant's life. But then we've also have 13% sulfur. These are all important nutrients to help drive the reproductive parts of that plant. And we're seeing some really, really phenomenal results with this. This, just like AcreEdge boron, has crop power with it. So if you start with crop lift and you follow up with Rhizin and K, that's just another boost of crop power to help mitigate those environmental stresses. Now, when you look at the use rate, when we're going at that R3 on soybeans, it's 2 to 6 quart. This past year, we're at 2 quart. That 2 to 3 quart per acre, we're seeing some really, really great results with it. Next slide, please. So this is a soybean recommendation. So when we're at that herbicide timing, I would put that quarter crop lift in. Again, getting that energy and that crop power to help mitigate those environmental stresses. When we get to that R3, that fungicide timing on soybeans, let's get that nitrogen, that potassium, and that sulfur. You look at the environmental conditions we're at that time. These are very, very important nutrients to help drive the key activities and help that plant overcome stresses along with crop power. Next slide, please. So does it work? You know, these all sound fine and dandy, and we great program, but does this work? So this is actually some research data we have from 2024. This come out of our plot in Boone, along with some market awareness trials we have with growers. These are replicated, depending on where they're at, depends on how many replications they were. These are crop lift corn foliars. So these were all applied at the herbicide timing. That one, that actually was in the Boone facility. We've actually got 60 acres around the Boone facility where we do some trials, market awareness trials and demonstration trials. 6 bushel the acre there. 2 grower trials, we had market awareness trials, we had 9.48 bushel and 11 bushel. So if you look at that, if you're to average those different trials with multiple replications, you're going to gain 8.83 bushel to the acre. If you take that times $4 corn, now I looked at the market prices, Dan, a little bit earlier, and we're over $4 corn, but for my easy math, I'm going to say that bushel increase is going to be worth $35.32. This treatment is going to be around $8 an acre. If you're going to put a quart to the acre on, that's a 4.4 to 1 return on investment. Again, this is the data we have. If we had less yield, we would share it that way. So as it comes in, we're going to continue to build this. Next slide, please. This is on soybeans. Again, multiple locations. We had 2.59 bushel per acre. I think that was replicated 4 times in the Boone plot. We had market awareness trial where we had 2 bushel and then 3 bushel in another. So you take this times $9.50 soybeans. Now, I think this is a little bit higher than what the price is today. I think we're probably closer to 9.25 than we are 9.50. But again, my simple math, averaging 2.53 bushel to the acre, that's $24.35, $8 treatment. We're still a 3 to 1 return on investment. So like Matt Brown said, when we brought this forward, our goal was to make sure that we were gaining a 3 to 1 return on investment for our customers. And this continues to show us that it has the ability to do that. Now, when we listen to Eric Snodgrass later on in this presentation, and he lets us know what the weather is going to do, and we wonder how can we help overcome that or help reduce that. Think about these programs. Think about crop lift. Think about Rise N K. Think about NitroEdge boron. These all have crop power in them, and they can help reduce the effects of stress. Now, it's not going to overcome all the effects, but it sure will mitigate it, and it will help return that money on investment. Next slide, please. This is Rise N K. So this is actually a field trial that was done in Southwest Iowa. We've got the acres there. This was run across a scale. I believe this was 2 quarts to the acre applied with fungicide. 12.44 bushel. As I was actually preparing for this meeting, I was working with Dan Bjorklund. Dan Bjorklund is actually heading up to Northeast Iowa to get a testimonial. And his comment to me was, Scott, we have another somewhat of a trial that we're seeing similar results with it. So again, it depends on what the environment is, the nutritional value in the soil, but we can see some pretty phenomenal results with that. So I believe that is my last slide. Next slide, please. So with that, yeah, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Bjorklund. If you have any questions, please type those into the chat box. And when we get done at the end of Mr. Snodgrass' presentation, we will get to those questions. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your commitment, and excited to hear your stories about AcreEdge.
Hey, Scott, before we turn it over, I just want to make a comment here real quick. So while you were going through all of that, looking at those trials, I pulled up all the data from Boone, Iowa, which is where some of your trials are from, right?
Yes.
So to think about the advantage that was had this year, because what did the markets do every time it rained, right? They just kept going down. So we kept losing value. And if you look at these sections of Iowa where you're trialing this, you had a cold and a very wet spring, right? So you can already see the advantage on that. And then you finished under extremely dry conditions for September and October. So if you want to just talk about, you know, a real live thing, we cannot underestimate the power of these trials and the coordination with the weather data and what they actually mean. So this is, I know often we listen to, you know, hey, look, we got this yield advantage. That's the real world stuff, right? This was a year where these products showed that they offered the yield advantage when the markets were going the wrong direction. That's how you outdo your neighbors. You've got the product on so that you have the yield, you got more going across those scales, and in the end of it, that's bottom line. So Scott, I really enjoyed that, but I thought it was fascinating to look up that weather data and go, man, you guys got stressed hard early and then hard late, super wet and super dry, and you still saw the yield advantage.
Eric, I processed all that yield data on SMS, and they've got the ability to tie the weather into that, and it showed exactly that.
Yeah,
about 90% of our moisture come by the 1st of August.
Yep.
But then you look at our growing degree stress, you looked at normal growing degree units, we were below that.
Oh yeah. Yep.
It was cold, and then we turned off dry. So yeah, I'll share that with you or anybody else that has questions in the future. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bjorklund. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Dan Bjorklund, I'm the technical agronomist for Landis, and I'm going to talk about something that we don't normally talk about these types of meetings, and that is corn genetic families and how they differ potentially in utilization of nitrogen and potassium. Go ahead and advance it, Nate. I think one of the big questions that everyone is going to ask when you're thinking about genetic diversity and you're thinking about the environment that we have next year and the potential for whatever occurs with our weather impacts. We know what's happened with tar spot in the last 3 or 4 years as it's gone across the eastern states to the western states, and Iowa was hit really hard in the bottom 2 tiers of the state this year. So genetic diversity is really important. When you think about corn, I've been doing this for about 45 years, and I still remember the days when we talked about southern corn leaf blight and what that did in the 70s and the huge impact that had on the genetics that we had then. Seed companies don't share this information. You have a hard time finding out what male and female inbreds, which are those genetic families that make up the hybrid you plant. So the question is, how do you know you're planting genetically diverse hybrids on your farm? Now, I could spend way more than the 15 minutes that I have and go through all the plant variety protection certificates that are on the USDA website that anybody can access, but I will tell you that it takes hours and weeks and months to go through those from the 80s all the way up to current time. And they are in existence for about 20 years. They're like a plant patent, then they go off. But it's really important to understand that. So instead of doing that, I just thought I would show you photos from this summer. So the first slide, or the first photo, shows you 2 different tassel types that you will see in about 85 to 90% of the corn. Now, I always like to ask this question, and obviously I'm talking to a computer screen, so I'm not going to get that response you would have in person. But one of these tassels represents a genetic type that actually would tolerate or more tolerate dry, hot weather next year. And I know that because I have studied this genetics over the time and seen the plot data. Many of you haven't had that opportunity. There's another tassel that's represented here that represents a hybrid that is very, very dependent upon good potassium levels, especially if we have dry weather and the top 6 inches dries out, because that's where a lot of our potassium is located. So here are 2 different genetic types that you can see from the tassels. And if you're out in your fields and you don't see these differences, you're probably not very genetically diverse, because these 2 tassels represent about 90% of the genetics that's planted today between 2 companies, the 2 big companies, and you know who those companies are. Next, we see the silks that correspond to these tassels. And as an agronomist, I know this is kind of crazy, but this is my favorite time of the year in July, when Eric normally gets very hot. And that's when you can go out and you can actually see genetic diversity, because you can see the pink to purplish silks, you can see the versus the white silks corresponding to that really tight, compact tassel we showed in the previous slide, or the one with the big, long main spoke. And again, they represent different genetics that will respond differently in weather environments and to potassium and nitrogen utilization. So let's get right into that. Let's look at potassium first. If you're looking at potassium, well, obviously this ties into that also. Here are 2 root types that also correspond to the previous 2 slides that we've showed. Started doing this probably 15, 20 years ago, where I'd go out into fields and plots, dig up the plants, and measure the nodal root system coming off the crown. And you would find these big fibrous roots like the one on the left side of your screen with a big, massive fibrous root system. That represented one genetic type. The other one represented a very narrow root system, penetrated pretty well if you have heavy clay soils, but might be a little suspect if you got into dry weather for obvious reasons when you look at that. Taking that then and looking at potassium, which we'll see in the next slide, the question is, do genetic families differ in potassium utilization efficiency? And you probably haven't heard that term before, but PUE actually is a term that's used in public research now, public universities, no matter where you're at, in private companies. And it's basically the ability of the plant to transport, uptake potassium and utilize it in the plant. The answer is yes. There are differences, and I'm going to show you some university data that also reflects that. But when you look at the bullet statements that I have listed, there definitely have been genes that have been found that are responsible for K transport. There are differences between different genetic families, and those are the male and the female inbreds that make the hybrids that you plant. There are differences between those. You can probably see from the third bullet statement that it talks about root systems. That previous slide we showed you showed a very narrow root system versus a very broad fibrous root system. So you probably can already see just from the plain physics that if you're looking at a year where we might be a little bit on the drier side and the soils dry out in the top 6 inches, and we have the clay layers collapse, trapping that potassium, plus the soil is dry, so you don't get the normal movement through the soil moisture, we could have some potential challenges in those situations. And in that situation, the biggest root probably wins. Okay, we can go to the next. Yeah. This is a study that about 20 years ago, I worked for a company that actually had the inbreds right in the plots along with the hybrids. And it was a very, very technical discussion about the various different inbreds that were developed over time at the public institutions and then went through private companies and all that. We talked about one that was a Western responsive hybrid. Next slide, Nate. And this was a study that developed out of that discussion in Kansas. K-State specialists were there, university personnel were there, and they said, hey, we want to test what you're saying. You're saying that there are some genetics that you call Western that are very responsive to potassium. So they put this study in. When I'm reading research, results of research projects, I kind of skip through a lot of it, and I just get to the results. So we'll go to the results page of what they found. And basically, we gave them 2 different hybrid types. Go ahead to the next slide, Nate. We gave them 2 different hybrids. One we called responsive, really kind of a potassium hog, really needed the potassium to yield. And the other one was not. And you can see in the yellow what their results and discussion was. They said a large response was measured with the hybrid referred to as a responsive hybrid, whereas little response to the non-responsive hybrid. Here's my favorite point here. This points to the fact that at least some seed sellers have hybrid specific information that may be useful in making management decisions. I trained our Eastern Iowa group today. We went over this information. They know which hybrids are the ones that are K responsive, which ones that are most efficient. So you can get that information when you're working with your Landis people out at the locations. So we'll go to the next slide and wrap up potassium and start going towards nitrogen. This was a plot that photo I took from a plot where I'm standing between 2 hybrids. And you can see, obviously, there's a difference. The one on the left showing a lot of deficiency symptomology. The one on the right is basically just bullet. So right side by side, this was taken in one of the drier environments that we've had in the last few years. It's interesting to look at. It seemed like from 2015 to 2019, it never quit raining. From 2020 to 2024, it's just been a very interesting contrast. And you can see the contrast here. So there are differences. You can visually see them. And we've talked a little bit about the why, but we're going to go over now and look at nitrogen. Potassium, very important. We're going to start looking at nitrogen as well. So I'll have you advance to the next one. Go ahead to the next one. Okay. I did have one more slide on potassium that I wanted to use before I go to nitrogen, and that is this one. And with everything that I've said in about the last 10 minutes, it all comes down to what do we do with information for 2025? So if you're looking at 2025 and you had a soil test report that came back and you look at the potassium levels that are listed here, they're all very, very low, from 110, 100 to 117, very, very low. So we're starting with a very low soil profile with potassium. The question that would come is, for the farmers on here, what hybrids would I plant in this field? Because I probably don't have enough time to build the soil back up to those. I'm going to try, but I'm not going to do it in 1 year. The second question would be for the ag retailers here. What do you recommend to your farmers if you've got a soil type like this? And we just don't give this information out very much, but based off of which ones have better utilization, what we've learned about the different genetic types, here's how I would address it. I would want that hybrid with the biggest, most robust root system, which sounds kind of like Captain Obvious here, but it really is. And unless you know what the root structure is of the hybrids you're planting, you don't know that until you plant them, until you check them and scout them in the summertime. We can give you that information ahead of time because we measure it ahead of time, like the slide we showed you. So there are definite differences, and I think we need to start paying a little bit more attention to that in the genetics that we plant, and make sure we have not only the ones with the green silks, but also some with the purple silks to get diversity. Okay, now to nitrogen. Are there differences to nitrogen utilization by hybrids? Yes, they are. And I listed here some common public hybrids. The first one, the Mo 17s from Missouri, was one of the first male inbreds used in hybrid corn. So we're talking over 50 years ago. Still used today. Not this particular line, but modifications of that line. It gives you a very tall plant, flowers late for its maturity, and loves late nitrogen. And so in a year where nitrogen could become deficient, which you could have said there were parts of northern Iowa like that this year because we had all the rain early and then dry later on, and we lost some of that fall anhydrous of the year before. This is a hybrid that would probably show the first deficiency symptoms. So you need to know those bases. The next one is from Ohio, and Ohio 43, that has been shown to have very good nitrogen utilization efficiency. Would not show that symptomology as much as the first one. And the last one there is a female. The B73s came out of Iowa State. It's in almost 90% of the genetics that you plant. They've been modified, but the two major companies that develop genetics, as well as some of the other ones, they all use it. It gives you that very upright type leaf structure, and it's a very good seed producer, and that's why they use it. So all three of these have a little bit different response to nitrogen. So Nate, go to the next slide. And what I want to basically say is, I think I'm coming up to my last slide here before we turn it over to Eric. When I came to Landis 3 years ago, I went to our individual who puts in our Farnhamville research plot, and I said, Dave, I want to do a timing test. a rate, and I want to look at timing of nitrogen application by the genetics that we're recommending. So we used quite a few of the Corteva genetics and quite a few of the Bayer genetics, and we put them out in a plot. We went with a base rate of 160 pounds of anhydrous in the fall alone. And then we went with corresponding applications in the spring of an additional 50 pounds of UAN, 50 pounds with urea base, some stabilized, some not. And we compared the two different genetic types. Very fascinating. We had one hybrid from each of those companies that was statistically better than the rest of the plots. They were both probably about the same. They both went, this was 3 years ago, we had some timely rain. It wasn't hot, and we had 300 bushels with those two types. But what was fascinating was this: one of those hybrids hit 300 bushels with just fall anhydrous at 160, and the additional 50 pounds had no impact, no improvement. It was actually less. The other one hit 300, but it had 160 in the fall, and that additional 50 pounds in the spring is what made the difference for that. Where it was just 160 in the fall for that, it dropped off. What that said to me was that there is a response difference. There are some hybrids that you could probably maximize yield by by putting more on in the spring. Probably the best application method, and I know this doesn't work for everybody, we've got a wide audience here, would be to do some fall applications. I know for timing purposes, but to come back in the spring, in a year like this year, Eric, with all the rain we had in northern Iowa, those spring wide dropping, it had a significant impact. So I just found that was really interesting. It's just one trial, one location, but there was a difference between those particular companies. So I wanted to just introduce this in 15, 20 minutes. This is about as much as you can do to set the stage for the next one. I do have one final slide, and it ties into a little bit of what Scott was saying. Nate, if you want to switch to that slide. What I really like about our next speaker is that he forecasts what's going to happen in the future, and then when it happens, he tells you why it happened. I just find that fascinating. In agronomy, I like to be that type of an agronomist that we say, hey, the old illustration of, I don't want the sports analogy in hockey. I don't want to be where the puck is now. I want to predict where the puck's going to be in the future. And so that last slide was basically talking about why crop lift works, and it was talking about the brown kelp that Scott mentioned. And basically what it does is it improves the nitrogen efficiency and assimilation and movement into the ear, but also then in a stress environment, it helps on potassium uptake. So the crop lift that Scott talked about also ties into the genetics and to the nitrogen and potassium as well. With that, I have a slide. Eric, last week I watched your webinar, and you've used this slide in our training because I thought it was just a very interesting slide of what's happened the last 40, 50 years and looking at the different weather patterns. And so I will stop there. Just remember, there are differences in hybrids. There are differences in nitrogen and potassium utilization. And we'll be happy to answer any questions afterwards. But with that, I will turn it to Eric.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And Dan, I'd like to cover some of the bigger picture things I did in that webinar earlier this week. But I'll be honest with you, Scott, I see you on my screen right now. Man, I wish I could take some crop power internally. I'm battling a cold right now. And from what you made it sound like, it helped me get through this, which would be nice. But, just one other thing to comment on here, coming back to just Scott's comments earlier. David Hula, I've met him several times. Very, very nice man. He's used the same hybrid almost every time he's won the Corn Growers competition. What I find amazing about that is you look over his time period that he's won, his variation in yield is 150 bushel. And that is all abiotic stress. That is all weather stress. And so you mentioned the potential. We always have something to talk about with respect to, what ideal weather is versus what we actually get. And here's, I just want to make this statement today before I even start sharing my screen. Okay. I've been doing professional forecasting in ag for 15 years. Before that, I was a professor, and I was a professor at University of Illinois. Don't anybody get mad at me about that. I love Iowa schools. Don't, we're cool on that. Okay. But one of the things that just stands out to me so much about all of this is that, that perfect forecast, that perfect weather, it doesn't exist. And therefore we're going to have a stress every year. And, the idea about trying to predict the next disaster is hard. So here's what I want to tell you. And I need you to listen to this before I even show my screen. Okay. For 15 years doing this, I have never taken the route in fall and early winter to say that I'm worried about drought the next year. It's the silliest thing in my opinion, because 6 months from now, so many things can change. But I just want to tell you, we're checking a couple boxes. And as we check those boxes, I just start to get worried about a couple of things I don't usually think, should cause me a lot of worry. I'm going to tell you this: spring rains can undo everything I'm about to share with you. And it can. And predicting the timing of those, in December is going to be a big challenge for us. So here's what we're going to do. Let's go ahead and let me share my screen here. And I'm going to dig into this, okay? I got a slide to kind of set this up. And I'm going to share with you what I put in this drought webinar earlier last week. I think you're going to find this quite intuitive. And so I hope you enjoy this. But what you've got here is 3 different areas: the Southeast, the West, which is on bottom, and the Midwest. And while the Southeast and the West tend to have multi-year droughts, in the Midwest, our droughts, our biggest ones, have one common thing. They rarely last more than 9 months before their break, and they almost always start midsummer. And we have to ask ourselves, is 2025 setting up to be one of those years? So I gave the folks all of this. I said, there's 5 things to know about drought. You want to be able to forecast drought? It's easy. You already have drought? That's the easiest way to forecast drought. Drought begets drought. I mean, we have that phrase from the 1930s, right? All signs fail in times of drought. That is all signs of rain fail in times of drought. I'll also tell you this: drought never breaks gently. I mean, you Iowa guys, do you remember what broke the drought in 2020 we were dealing with? The derecho in August. Do you think about in Illinois, where I am, what broke the drought in 2023? A derecho. We have hurricanes that break derechos in our cotton belt. We always have big atmospheric rivers that target the West Coast with 25 inches of rain that break their drought situation. I've never seen the atmosphere just go, oh, you know what? I'm done with drought. Here's a nice couple of weeks of gentle rain. It just doesn't do that. It has to break hard. Next thing I knew about drought is you all love it. You just don't want it where you farm. And if you're all on this call from Iowa today, you'd love it if Illinois had a disastrous drought. I understand why. We certainly are we carry the country in terms of our yield and total production potential. I think we can all agree it'd be nice if we had a drought in Brazil, but I don't even have to talk about Brazil tonight because unfortunately Brazil is firing on all cylinders with big crops. Last 2 things. I'm going to be very clear here. I work for both Conduit and Landis. If I could predict next year's yield robbing drought with high skill and accuracy, I don't work for anybody. We clear on that? So we just need to understand here that the things we're going to talk about, while they are scientifically sound, we're trying to predict the future of a nonlinear chaotic fluid, and that's difficult to do. Here's my last one. I want you to get this. Drought forms on constructively adding components. So it's not just one thing. It's a sequence of things. We have to study that because every end of a big downturn in the market since 1960 has had a weather phenomena pushing it. These are all the in-betweens when we had our big super cycles, right? And we have a question: how long is this last one going to last? So to come back to that slide that was shared a moment ago, this is it. We've got such high variance in our prices. And right now we're looking at some sort of supply side shock as being the answer to our low prices. And what that often comes down to is just understanding where there's drought. So I'm going to make sure and send you these slides so you got this actual slide so it's nice and clear for your presentations. But outside of a flood of 1993, where Iowa became the 6th Great Lake, and then the flood and cold of 2019, almost every other major event that took us far off trend was due to some form of drought. So here we go. Okay. I stitched together our worst yielding years. And you say, well, what does it take? It takes something just pumping the heat here and keeping it bone dry right there. Just squat in the middle part of the country. And I need to teach you very quickly here what makes that happen. I'll also say this: our best years for yield do not have cool West Coasts. Our best years are when the West Coast is absolutely scorched and burning. So here's the story, okay? You look at the July to August timeframe of our lowest yielding years for the Corn Belt, and these statistics are heavily biased toward Iowa and Illinois. You get this. You get the jet stream locking up into what we call the triple ridge pattern. Now, that's all you need to be listening to guys like me talk about going into next year is, do we have a triple ridge pattern? One over north of Hawaii, one over the Great Lakes, and one closer to Ireland and Iceland. When that happens, we shut the whole pattern down. It loses its flow and momentum. We shut off the Gulf of Mexico, and what starts a drought just keeps it. It just keeps it being reinforced over time. So you say, Eric, are there any precursors? And this is where I want you to listen carefully. When you get to July and August and you say, is there anything that could give me a lead? Just tell me if something is out there that could increase the risk. I'm just going to tell you, watch the Pacific Ocean temperatures. Almost every year that we had significant drought, from Japan to the Gulf of Alaska, off the Baja of California, and even in the center of the equatorial Pacific, we had cold water temperatures. In fact, even the drought of the 1930s, we looked back and got ship reports across the open Pacific, and guess what we found? Cold water temperatures. You're going, why does that matter? Well, if you got cold water there, guess where it dips the troughs of low pressure? Into the west. So if you want to have a year where we are not worried about drought in Iowa, all this needs to be hot. Now, I've given them all acronyms: PDO, Pacific Decadal Oscillation; PMM, Pacific Meridional Mode; ENSO, El Nino and the Southern Oscillation. The negative means La Nina. We can always just think of these things as stock market indexes. And this is what I want to show you. You look across the whole country, every spike down is a La Nina, every spike up is an El Nino. Now, if I put circles on every time we had above trend yield, there you go. We have a lot of people that make a big deal out of El Nino and La Nina. And the reality is the correlation is not as strong as you all might think it is. Notice you have some years where we had above trend yield and there was a La Nina. So we just have to remember how this is all going to work, okay? What about that PDO piece? Well, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, that's a little bit better of an indicator. All of our positive yielding years, which are highlighted here, do you see how more of them are in the red? That positive yielding years where we're way above trend, we tend to have a lot of warm water in the North Pacific versus our terrible yielding years. More of them tended to be. So to be honest with you, watching La Nina is kind of a waste of time. You need to watch the PDO. And there's that last one, the PMM off the Baja of California, your worst yielding years versus your best. You can clearly see here that there is a bias. If you get those waters warm off the Baja, better chances of good yields. If they're cold, you have better chances of poor yields. So I do all of that because we're ultimately trying to figure out what's going to drive that summer drought. Okay, what is it? And I'm just going to tell you this. Why I care about the Pacific is because of what it does to the Atlantic. You all know our weather goes in that direction. There's no surprises there. But what often happens, let me go back to this, is this. The Bermuda High is always the first thing to go. So when you start building cold water in the Pacific and steal momentum, guess where the Bermuda High goes? European vacation. Pacific High floats over toward, I don't know, the Bering Sea. You're left with a big omega block cut off the Gulf of Mexico. And every time this occurs, we get cold water inside of that area there that I shaded with those blue colors. So that is your setup. Now watch this. Map of the world, you see Bermuda's labeled. You take all of our worst yielding years and say, Eric, where was the Bermuda High in summer? And that's where it was located. The Pacific High was way off over by Japan or in the middle of the Pacific, whatever, but it was nowhere near the West Coast. On the flip side, best yielding years look something like this. The key thing is the Bermuda High. Now, I know a lot of you know Elwin Taylor, right? I know that dude hounded for decades about the Bermuda High, and I'm just here to repeat that guy's story. The Bermuda High is key. You say, well, why is the Bermuda High key? The Bermuda High is key because in the high yielding years, it sits off the southeast and just pumps moisture and keeps us cooler in the midsection of the country. It is the moisture pump. And here's what it looked like this year. The Bermuda High was right there. You say, where's Bermuda? It's here. That is Bermuda. The flow comes around this and just snakes right through here and runs straight north-south, pumping us full of moisture. We saw that all spring long until we got into September. And guess what happened in September? The Bermuda High went to Africa. And when it left, we had record dry fall. It's always about that. And by the way, when the atmosphere is capable of opening the Bermuda High up, you get massive storms. And these were some big ones that came out of Nebraska into western Iowa back on July the 31st. I'll never forget it because I was out there on these storms in Omaha. And they did a lot of damage. We had 4 derechos this year out of this. Iowa, you were the epicenter of tornadic activity. We had 1,700 tornadoes this year across the whole country. And the Bermuda High was home making all that happen. So let me give you the flip side of it. You remember a spring a year ago from May the 9th to June 28th? Really, really bone dry in the midsection here of the country going up toward the Great Lakes. You say, why? What was happening? This is why. The Bermuda High, which is supposed to be near Bermuda, moved all the way over here. That left a big high pressure cell sitting in this area. Do you all remember when we had flow that came out of the north and east during that spring of 2023, later on delivering us a lot of smoke? Don't forget, we like that smoke. I know if you've not heard this research, that smoke is a very good thing in the upper atmosphere. We have found that smoke on average keeps our temperatures down about 5 degrees cooler than it would be otherwise. That's what kept us away from major danger until the Bermuda High came back and we started to soak things. Now listen to me carefully. Why in 2023 did we do okay? We did okay because going into it, by May 15th, we had good soil moisture except around Kansas City. And it didn't get hot. And the net effect of that was we still were able to pull out decent yields. And that's why some of these products give you that edge over everybody else when we have years like that. So I'll skip that and get here. So what causes the Bermuda High to move? It's simple. Take the fastest bits of the jet stream and shift them all the way up into Canada, leaving the slow bits over the United States. And that slow flow ruins the ability for the atmosphere to generate new storm cells by pulling Gulf of Mexico moisture up. So our worst yielding years build in heat early. How many of you right now in Iowa remember how much you loved planting in 2012, right? I remember in Illinois, it was 85 degrees March 5th. We were all in early. We were looking okay, but all that heat didn't leave. And if you have no gradient in temperature, you have no reason to make the atmosphere move. You want years like this, where it's colder farther to the north and it's hotter to the south. Then the jet stream screams in between the two. Think about that. So just to give you a case in point, you want the jet stream to leave Japan at 200 miles an hour and finish somewhere over by Greenland or by Iceland or by Ireland at the same speed. We need momentum in the flow. Slow it up over British Columbia. Put them under the heat. So I'm going to skip this because this is a bit too complicated and get right here. All right. I now told you got to watch ocean temperatures and then what happens at Bermuda High. So here's the current ocean temperature pattern. There's a weak La Nina. There's been some cold water in the Gulf of Alaska. There's some cold water off the Baja. Now, do you see why I'm saying there's drought risk for next year? Watch it again. From September, here's the time. Going into December, that cold water showed up in 3 spots. Those are 3 spots we don't like. Bullet point 2, at the end of October, after about 60 days of incredibly fast harvest, but bone dry conditions, where I know all of you were ruining tips going through those fields when you were done, we saw soil moisture values down in the lowest 2 percentile. That's the driest it's been in 50 years in fall. Even after the moisture that's come through, and yeah, Iowa, got a little bit of moisture coming through right now, you go down to 16 inches, most of the state is still inadequate on moisture. Same with Illinois, same with Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Michigan, Wisconsin. We got a problem. And that's because the start of November the start of December went back over dry. You can see it right here in the stats from Iowa State. Fantastic set of statistics here from that great university. And you say, why does this all matter? And I said, I told you earlier, you watch the oceans, they're going to tell you what's up. But you know what also tells us what's going on in the central US? This big river system. That river system will always tell you how things are going. You want to know your soil moisture? You just look at the river gauges from the USGS. And I want you to see that right now, the Mississippi River a week ago was 7 feet below low stage. And after some rain around St. Louis this past weekend, it's now back up to 1 foot below low stage. We need that river 20 feet above low stage before we see completely saturated ground. So what does that fall drought mean? I took every year where there was a fall drought and I said, what happened in the following May to August? And it was hot here and it was dry. See that? See these composite maps? Fall drought, if you don't break it in spring, begets drought the next year. You say, okay, you mentioned La Nina. Does it even matter? Yeah, it does matter. We got all these weak La Ninas down here at the bottom. Look, I made a list of all of them here. This is what they tended to do the next year. May through August following weak La Ninas tended to be dry in this corridor and warmer than average here and here. So we get concerned about those two factors, which is why we started off looking at ocean temperatures and we started off looking at our moisture situation. You say, Eric, are there any good years that you can just compare this to? I'm going to give you two cases. You ready for this? And both of these cases reinforce exactly what Scott and Dan just talked about. Now, look, in 2008, 2008 is the line that's highlighted right here. 2024 is this thick line there. Starting in July till now, our ocean temperature trend in the Pacific looks very like 2008. So what happened into 2009? Oh, man. We started off January 1, 2009 with all three things I'm worried about, right? Cold Gulf of Alaska, cold off the West Coast, cold in the equatorial Pacific. But watch, listen to me carefully. Watch what happened in 2009 from Jan 1 to June 25th. Where did the cold water go? It all warmed up. And when it warms up, guess where the heat goes? Western United States. And by the time we got through with summer of 2009, it was wet, only dry way up here by the Red River of the North and northern Minnesota, Wisconsin. We're not growing a lot of crop up here, right? Northern Minnesota, Wisconsin. We tended to be wet, especially as you got over toward the river, and it got cold. Now, you were just talking a few minutes ago about nitro edge boron, right? This is the kind of summer that is a possibility for next year. And if we get into that cool situation, because this La Nina, the cold water off the Baja, the cold water in the Gulf of Alaska just vanish, you need to know that. Here's my second case study, though. 2005, which is this color here, from May on has almost perfectly matched 2024. You know what happened into 2006? We saw cold water right there, cold water here, cold water there in December, and it still was cold by June 1. Do you see this? What happened that summer? Ridge number 1, ridge number 2, ridge number 3. That is your triple ridge setup. And what you end up getting was this. Very hot and dry coming at us from the north, hot and dry coming at us from the south. This is the temperatures. Most of Iowa had a top 15 hottest summer on record, and the farther north and west you go, we smoke that crop. Now, just imagine if we went into something like this next year. This is what we're talking about. So listen carefully. You say, Eric, all right, you're talking confidently about things, but I want you to know the odds. Right now, of all of the years that have this mix of ingredients, fall drought, weak La Nina, cold water in the Gulf of Alaska, cold water off the Baja, look up here, 60%. So that's 6 in 10 times we ended up with the 2006 type scenario. 4 in 10 times, we got something closer to 2009. And what I'm going to tell you guys is simply this. I listened to all of you guys presenting on these products. You understand that on both sides of the spectrum, they give you the advantage. And so what's important to me about this is, let's say that the drop doesn't manifest itself. We see prices continuing to decline next year. A yield advantage is what gives you exactly what you need to make up for that. That's the ROI. If I'm right and it goes the other direction, the yield advantage is what gives you the numbers across the scale that gives you more money for that crop that's got an elevated price. And so these are the things that are top of mind for me going into the next year. And I want to give you these two case studies so that you know what I'm thinking about. So listen, I see it's 6:03. I imagine we wanted to stop this at 6, but I'm going to park it right there. And just if you have questions for me, pepper me with questions. I'd be more than happy to go after them. But Tyler, I'll turn it back over to you. I appreciate the chance to kind of tell you what I'm worried about. And I'll just say this, I'm going to be worried about it until I'm not worried about it. Okay? That's how it works when we predict the future.
Perfect. Thank you, Eric. You definitely have me worried about it after that. So I'm sure there's others on the call the same way. So hi, everybody. My name is Tyler Schultes. I'm the Vice President of Sales here at Landis. I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to each and every one of you for spending the last hour with us on this call. From the fantastic AcreEdge yield results that Scott shared, to Dan's insightful information about genetic diversity, to our best-in-class weather outlook with Eric, I hope this evening's webinar provided valuable insights to assist you on your farm. At Landis, we strive to keep this farmer at the center of everything we do. I think this webinar is a great example of that. And today we discussed a lot of great things. If there's any questions that you may have that you want to discuss further, please reach out to any of our sales reps or give us a call on our Grow line at 515-800-GROW. We'd be happy to dive into any questions that you may have and just one-on-one conversations that we can have about that. As we near the end of the calendar year, be sure to utilize some of these great tools that we have to offer. I'm very excited for the opportunity to lock in these AcreEdge products that we discussed today with 0% financing for the 2025 growing season. Today we heard about the positive ROIs that Scott brought to the table with the AcreEdge products. We heard Eric talk about the weather stressors that we may be facing next summer. When you couple the stress mitigation brought to the field by AcreEdge and the added benefit of not having to pay for those products until January of 2026, it's truly an opportunity you don't want to miss. So once again, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to spend this hour with us. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to serving you on your farm in 2025. Definitely wish you all a great and happy holidays from us here at Landis. Please reach out with any questions or comments that you may have.